Well, we will go on and get started. We've got an exciting webinar for y'all today. I'm excited about this because this is something that I want to know more information about. So we are going to be talking about the cloud, and it can be overwhelming. So whether you are considering this move or trying to prepare and about to make the move, or maybe you're trying to convince your executive staff or team that this is something you need to do, Travis is going to be going over the things that you should know before moving your church to the cloud. And Travis has been with Enable for 10 years, and he oversees all of Enable's technology, strategy, and direction for our clients. So I'm excited to hear from him. He's one of the smartest people I know, and I'm not just complimenting you, Travis. Just you really are one of the smartest people I know, so I'm excited to learn from you today. And so we're going to hear from him and a few logistical things. You can write a question in the Q&A section on the far right of your screen. You also can pause the webinar at any time and play it if you need to go to the restroom or get a cup of coffee and then come back. So feel free to write your questions in there as they come up. We will actually address those as we get them. So we will be addressing those live. So Travis, without further ado, I will let you take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ellie. As Ellie said, we're excited to be presenting this today. I love talking about technology. If you've ever been to any of our webinars or trainings in the past, you know that I kind of get a little excited about it. So I'm passionate. I enjoy it. I enjoy helping people learn more about it. And that is the goal today. So I'll just reiterate something else that Ellie said. Ask questions, please. In fact, earlier we were talking, there's always at the end, there's questions and answers, but please don't wait until the end to ask your questions. I've asked Ellie to kind of keep an eye on that and ask me the questions as we go. I would rather be answering and helping you to learn the things that you're curious about rather than me worrying about getting through my agenda. So please do ask those questions in the chat and let's just keep them coming. So with that said, so today we're talking about church in the cloud. And we're talking about the things you need to know before thinking about moving your church to the cloud, or maybe you're already in the middle of it. And what else do you need to know? So hopefully this will give you some ideas. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about why you might want to, maybe some downsides potentially to doing it, and kind of what options there are, because it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. There's lots of different cloudy things out there. And so hopefully today will help you understand a little bit more about that. So it does help if I'm on the right screen so that my slides will advance. There we go. So there we go. Yeah.
Is that a technical term?
What's that? Cloudy things?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, sure. Why not? They can be cloudy things.
I like it.
All right, here we go. Without further ado, what is the cloud? So let's start with making sure we're all talking about the same thing and what it actually means. So the first thing you have to know is the cloud. And in most cases, when you hear that term, people are talking about what's called a public cloud, something that's hosted by someone else. Technically, you can have a private cloud. We're not going to talk about that today. We see the real value for most churches using public cloud solutions from places like Microsoft, Google, others that provide those kinds of things. Amazon is the other really popular one. And so in a nutshell, here's what the cloud is. If you're talking about the public cloud, you're just talking about somebody else's servers. There's no magic or mystery to it. It's not like it's this fancy other equipment. It's just instead of you buying servers and you managing servers, you're paying somebody else to do that work. They handle the hardware and they handle the connectivity pieces and they handle the security and they handle all of those aspects. That's all the cloud is. It's somebody else's equipment, somebody else's servers. Now, cloud does imply that things are interconnected and that there's some level of redundancy, generally more interconnectedness and more redundancy than what you would do if you were building your own server environment on your on-premise in your own building. And there is an inherent expectation of more security. It should be more secure if you're using somebody else's cloud. If they're the experts in this, they should be investing more than probably you can, both from a knowledge perspective and certainly from a time and cost perspective. So those are some things that you think about when you think about the cloud. You also think about, hey, it's always available. So now you don't have to worry about, oh, I have to be physically at my church campus or I have to use a VPN or something like that. The cloud, means always available as long as you have an internet connection. So that is one caveat. I used to use the example of, you hop on a plane and then you're not connected anymore. Well, even these days, when you hop on a plane, you're connected. So there's fewer and fewer places where you don't have internet. But it is important to know things that live in the cloud does require connectivity to that solution. The other thing about it is it's infinitely scalable. So when you think about the cloud, you don't have to worry about, well, do I have enough space? Do I have enough RAM? Do I have enough stuff to do what I'm wanting to do? Well, sure, because Amazon and Google and Microsoft have essentially unlimited supplies of those things. Now, technically, that's not true, but from our perspective, that tends to be true. We can just pay more money and get more of the things on a monthly basis. So, when we talk about cloud solutions or cloud services for churches, there's really two kind of primary styles that we talk about. Most commonly, most people these days are referring to things like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, or even maybe your church management system might be hosted in the cloud. And those types of things are called software as a service. You're not just getting room to run your own servers from them. You're actually you're being provided a software solution. And it may be a combination of multiple software things put together, but the idea is that you're paying for their solution that they have already built out for you, and you just get to consume it, meaning you get to just use those applications. You don't have to go manage the servers that make it happen. So that's really beneficial and really helpful. That really can help smaller churches, but it's also beneficial for larger organizations too, because now you don't have to spend your time, money, and energy managing the servers. You're just worried about using the applications. And so that's really nice. And so that's where a lot of churches are shifting toward a lot of software as a service cloud usage. But there is another form that is common in churches these days, depending on your needs, and that's called infrastructure as a service. And so this one gets a little technical, and I'll try to keep it high level here. But the idea with infrastructure as a service is you're not buying equipment, you're not buying physical hardware, and you're not plugging it into your internet connection or to your power or needing to cool it at your location. You're letting Microsoft or Amazon or Google have the hardware, but then they're letting you manage your own servers inside of their virtual environment. So infrastructure as a service is useful if you have things where you have to manage a server. You've got to install the software. You've got to update the software yourself, but you just don't want hardware in the closet down the hall. So that can still be a use of the cloud. And there are cost considerations and many other things on whether or not that would be viable or useful for you. But it's a good way to get much beefier, bigger, more capable hardware than maybe what you could afford on your own if you were to just have to buy it outright. Because again, you get to pay for that per month instead of that big capital expense up front. So software as a service and infrastructure as a service, and there's others, but those are the two most common ones that we see in churches. All right, so now that we kind of know what the cloud is, let's talk just a little bit. Let's go just a little bit further, because one of the things that a lot of people assume when you talk about the cloud means, well, if I'm going to the cloud, then that means I'm going to have no servers anymore. I'm going to be completely serverless. That is possible. And we have clients today that operate that way. And we have several other clients that are working toward that, because this is a journey, by the way. You don't get to the cloud overnight. You don't get serverless overnight. It's a process, and it can take months. It can take years, depending on what your appetite for change and what constraints you have that you're working with. So it is possible to be serverless, but you don't have to be. You can absolutely make use of the cloud without getting rid of all of your servers. Pretty commonly, we see things like HVAC systems or access controls, security cameras, things like production or media storage, especially, that stays on premises on either existing or even new server hardware. There's some other things too, but those tend to be the primary ones we see in churches. So sometimes there's reasons to keep servers around on-prem, maybe for cost or accessibility or other reasons. So don't assume that you have to be completely serverless just because you want to be in the cloud. There are cloud options for pretty much all of those systems, but again, is it worth it? What's the cost? What's the trade-off? What do you have to invest to make those changes? And those are considerations that you should make, and you should have your technology folks, or if you don't have someone, Enable would be happy to help you, but speak into that. Because what you'll find is that the vendors who manage HVAC and access control and those things, their understanding of the technology capabilities and understandings tend to be limited to what they have experience with. And so a great technology partner can come along and maybe speak to the broader technology capabilities. We won't necessarily have as much insight on exactly what your HVAC system does, but putting the two people in the room with the expertise on both sides of that can talk together and work together to find a solution, very, very helpful. We talked about this earlier. If you run or manage your own servers in the cloud, are you serverless? Right? So if I use infrastructure as a service and I'm managing servers, but all of them are in the cloud and they're not on-prem, is that serverless? I don't know. Does it matter? I don't think so. You can decide whether you want to call it serverless or not, and I will totally back you on that. Because trust me, if you ask technology people, you'll get different opinions on that question. Here's the key from Enable's perspective. Less is more. In other words, the less servers you're managing and maintaining, whether physical or virtual or on-site or off-site, or less is more. What has tended to happen in technology for the last, let's say for the last 12 years leading up to the last few years, we had this explosion of lots and lots and lots of servers. And this is what we tended to see, especially with virtualization, lots and lots and lots of virtual servers. Well, that gets really unwieldy really fast. That gets hard to manage and maintain. So what we're working toward with all of our clients is let's have less of those things. Let's have less things that we have to maintain day in and day out. Let's have less things that can possibly break and cause us issues. Let's have less things that add complexity in the environment that create more confusion or make change more difficult. So less servers is definitely a good thing in our opinion.
Amen, Travis. Amen.
That's right. Okay, so the big question everybody always has is, well, what does it cost me? There is this, I would call it misconception, that the cloud is always cheaper or the cloud stuff is free. Well, it is true that for nonprofits, Microsoft and others offer very generous discounts and in some cases free solutions for some of those software as a service things. They even have grant money for some of those infrastructure as a service things that can make some of that free. But I would highly recommend that you not think of a move to the cloud just because it's cheaper or just because it's free. Yeah, cost should be a consideration. Yeah, you're potentially shifting from a capital expense model to more of a recurring expense, maybe an operating expense model. Is that easier to budget for? Quite possibly. For a lot of churches it is. But don't just consider cost as your only factor, because the cloud isn't free and the cloud isn't always cheaper. So sometimes it's worth paying a little more to gain some of the other benefits that the cloud brings. And we'll talk about that in some upcoming slides. So what about the cost thing? Well, you do have reductions, right? If you can get rid of servers, then you're going to save floor space. Duh. If you don't need the servers there, they're not taking up space anymore. That means that you're saving on electricity costs, both from the electricity for the servers as well as what it costs for you to cool that space, because it's not cheap to keep servers cool, at least down here in Texas and in Nashville where we have offices, primary offices. It's not cheap to do those things. So it is good to reduce in those areas. And then, of course, you're reducing hardware and software licensing. So if you don't have the hardware, you don't have to pay for the software that runs on it. But again, maybe you're shifting that to paying the cloud vendor instead. It is important to know that normally most cloud offerings are based on a per user per month pricing model. And not everything is, but most things are. So just keep that in mind. And also keep this in mind, especially when you look at a Google Workspace or a Microsoft 365 or other software as a service solutions. Most of those are going to have a whole lot of options available to you. It's going to feel almost like you're being nickel and dimed to death to add this thing and that thing and add on and add on and add on. And you could argue that maybe that's true. The reason that they do it that way is they're trying to strike that right balance of saying, hey, look, you can have all of this stuff for this price. And if you want these other things, then you can add them on. So they're kind of the anti-cable monopoly model, right? So you're familiar with cable TV. You can't just get the channels that you want. You have to get all the channels. Well, with cloud solutions, they tend to be more of a, well, you can just get the ones you want. But that does mean that you may have 4 or 5 add-ons to reach the place that you want to be at. So just be aware of that and just be ready for that. As I mentioned, many nonprofit offers exist. Microsoft is, we talk about Microsoft a lot. If you've watched any of our webinars, we're big fans of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. We're big fans of their heart and approach toward religious-based organizations being eligible for all of their nonprofit offers. Some other technology vendors have chosen not to be as religious organization friendly. So just make sure that you do your homework and choose wisely what works best for your organization, but definitely always ask for nonprofit pricing for anything that you're getting from technology vendors. And then the scalability, we talked about that infinitely scalable thing on that last slide. Well, scalability is great. Just watch out, because infinitely scalable means you can just keep spending more money every single month and the vendor will be more than happy to take your money. So just make sure you're watching out for those costs and you know how you're spending that. Okay, so why might we want to do this? Well, access data from anywhere with no VPN required. That tends to be one of the most common requests or needs or desires for churches that are looking to be in the cloud, is they don't want to have their people on site in order to access things. Now, within the last year plus, we've all experienced this desire or this need to have some ability to work remotely. But even before the pandemic hit, this was very popular amongst churches. And I think you'll hear everybody saying these days, it's pretty expected nowadays that this will continue to be a need or a desire, at least from most employees. So accessing data from anywhere, making it simple, again, just an internet connection. The other benefit is this device or operating system agnostic approach. So most cloud solutions don't care if you're using a Mac or if you're using a Windows machine or if you're using an Android phone or an iPhone or a whatever tablet of the month you choose to prefer to have and to make use of. Most cloud solutions, particularly the software as a service solutions, are being designed to work across different platforms. That's really kind of great, because we advocate pretty strongly for user choice in the device platform that they're most comfortable and familiar with, because your users are going to be most effective and productive using the tools that they already know how to use. And so if you can give them an option of choosing what device or operating system they're most familiar with, you're going to get more productivity out of them. They're going to be happier in general. And by using these services that work across both, now you're not siloing data or departments from each other. So you can have users or entire departments that prefer running on a Mac, and they can absolutely share information and data with your Windows users, and it's just perfect. It's just fine. So that's a great one. Cost savings, maybe. We talked about that, possibly. Flexibility and scalability, we definitely talked about that. Here's one. Latest and greatest tools, always available. So, of course, the technology person would say this, right? We always like to have the new toys or the new gadgets, but most users these days, especially your younger generation users, have an expectation of that. They expect that the technology that they have access to on their work computer or their ministry system is going to be the same or better than what they have access to at home or what they had access to at school. And so if you can provide that, that is a benefit to your staff, and it ends up being a benefit to your organization as well. Because look, everybody these days is looking for a technological engagement some way, somehow. Now, I recognize there's some older members of your congregation or your staff that aren't looking for that, but our society heavily is trending in that direction. And so knowing that you've always got the latest and greatest available, and you're not always having to buy the new thing every year to try to keep up or upgrade to get it, these cloud solutions kind of naturally and natively are evolving all the time, and you're always getting access. So that's a good thing. And then sharing and collaboration. So this is the other thing that is becoming more and more common amongst productivity workers. And by that, I mean people that do files and share content with each other or communicate with each other. There's more of an expectation that that process is very simple and seamless. I want to be able to share files with people that are inside my department or in my organization as a whole, or even within the membership of the church. I want to be able to share and collaborate with volunteers the same way that I share and collaborate with somebody sitting at the desk right next to me. And these cloud-based solutions tend to empower that in a much, much better way than on-premise server solutions are capable of. Sorry, on-premises server solutions. I cannot believe I said on-premise server solutions. Oh my gosh, I know the difference, and it's kind of a pet peeve, so shame on me. On premises.
Well,
All right. Okay, so there's benefits, but there's also consequences, right? Almost every decision we make, there's some consequences associated. So what are those? Are these going to be unexpected or unintended? Well, maybe, but hopefully if you know about them ahead of time, then they don't become unexpected, maybe not even unintended, or maybe they are intended. We'll talk about that. The first one is reaction to change. Some of your staff are going to love it. They're going to love this shift. They're going to love all the things that we just talked about. Some of your staff, not so much, right? So there can be a consequence associated there if you are not setting appropriate expectations and communicating from leadership down to everybody why we're making these changes and that leadership is on board with these changes. Or maybe leadership isn't, and you're maybe missing the mark if you're driving forward with these changes. Wait, did the technology guy just say that maybe we shouldn't do the cloud? The technology guy just told you that you need to make sure that you're following your leadership and that you're leading up to your leadership. If you're not the one in leadership, you need to be leading up to them and you need to be having conversations with them to make sure that you're in alignment with their strategic desires and initiatives within your ministry. Maybe the cloud can be a big part of that. Pretty much every organization that I've seen these days that has a component, but maybe it's not as far as you would prefer it to go. Well, that's okay, but you need to make sure you're in lockstep. So that's just some, good organizational politics 101 right there. Bet you didn't know you were going to get that on an IT webinar. But be aware, some people are going to love it. Some people are not going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. And you need to know that. That space of the people that maybe don't love it, I'm going to talk in a minute about how you win them over and what you need to do and how intentional you have to be. So we'll come back to that. But other consequences to be aware of, bandwidth, your internet connection. Well, if everything is now across the internet from you, then it stands to reason that you need a really good connection to the internet in order to get to that stuff. And so that may mean that you need a better type of network connection, a more reliable internet service provider. Maybe you're moving from a coax or cable-based connection to a fiber-based connection or some other solution. That may also mean you need more speed. So maybe you have a 50 or a 100 megabit connection today, and in order to put everything in the cloud, you might need to double that or even triple that. Well, that's going to have a cost associated with it, but maybe that's offset by savings that you're making by not having servers on-prem that you have to purchase anymore. So all of those things play together. In the same vein that you've got to make sure you have enough bandwidth, enough internet connection, you need to make sure that your network is really solid. Now, I would argue that you really need to make sure your network, your wired and wireless network are really solid, even if your servers are on-prem, but it becomes even more obvious and important. It becomes more of an expectation when everything requires the network to be really good. You need to make sure that you've made the right investments there. Make sure that you have solid wired networking infrastructure. Make sure that when you walk into the wiring closets, the cables aren't just all over the place, right? It should look like it's been professionally done and organized and clean. Because while technically cables that are all over the place can totally work, when they go wrong or they have issues or people see it, there's a perception of how organized your IT environment is based on that, right? And so making sure it's clean, making sure it's standard, making sure it's up to snuff as they say, those are good things to do. Wi-Fi, same deal. You need to make sure you've invested in the right wireless network equipment and the right architecture for that equipment and the design of how that network works. You want it to be scalable. You want it to support all your users and the things that they need it to do. And so that backbone, that foundation becomes really, really important. Yeah.
Question, Travis. So if someone is looking to move to the cloud, but they're currently having Wi-Fi issues and people get kicked off and that's a current issue, would that be something you would say address before you even touch your servers and look at anything?
Before or in conjunction with, yes. And we've had some churches that say, you know what, so many of our people are working remotely, we want to address the cloud thing first, because then they'll be able to work remotely while we invest then in improving our on-prem network.
Yeah.
So that's a viable option as well, depending on where you're at. We recognize that it can be hard to go, okay, well, let's spend money on this cloud migration and replacing the Wi-Fi and fixing the cabling, and like it all kind of happens at once. That can be a big bill, right? That can be a hard pill to swallow. So that's a great point, though, Ellie, that if your network's not great, moving everything to the cloud is not going to make the network any better. So understanding where the actual issues lie. These days, it's very common for everybody to go, well, the Wi-Fi doesn't work. Well, that could mean the power went out, and we'll get the call that says the Wi-Fi doesn't work. That could mean the server failed again and crashed for the 5th time this week. But people are used to using the Wi-Fi, and that becomes the report. So understanding where your failure points really are is really, really important. Other potential unexpected or unintended consequences. Well, if you put everything in the cloud, your staff are going to naturally be inclined to think that they can work from anywhere at any time, because that's what all the cloud vendors say. Well, that may be what you want from your staff, but have you given them the tools they need to make that a reality? Have you provided them with mobile devices like laptops where they can work remotely? Or are they going to have an expectation that the next computer they get will be a laptop instead of a desktop because you're now in the cloud? Are their laptops or their desktops powerful enough? Do they have the right equipment on them? Do they have the, in the case of video conferencing needs, right? Do they have cameras? Do they have microphones? If they're desktop users, they probably don't. Some laptops don't have those things natively. And so those are considerations that you have to look at. How are your users going to interface with it, and what are their expectations going to become on-site versus off-site work? Again, going back to that leadership conversation, some of our churches are like, yes, we encourage all of our people to work remotely whenever they can. And other churches are like, honestly, our culture is we want our people on site working together side by side, Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday or whatever that looks like. So you just need to make sure that your leadership is clear and clearly communicating those expectations with staff, because staff are going to get their own expectations if you don't tell them what they should be. I'll just tell you. Training. So I mentioned this earlier, that you're going to have some people who are not so excited about this, but you're also going to have people that are really excited about this. But you know what those people have in common? They need to be trained how to use these things. So I just cannot emphasize this enough. Training has to be your #1 priority when you look at making a shift to cloud-based solutions, particularly and especially the software as a service solutions like Microsoft 365, including Teams and other things, or Google Workspace or any of these others. You are fundamentally changing how people will use their computers, how they will store files, potentially how they will communicate with each other. And if you expect them to figure that out for themselves, you are asking for a world of trouble. You're going to have those users who are gung-ho that will go figure out how they want it to work, and they will do it. And you will have plenty of users who have no desire to do it, and they will resist at every turn. And then what you end up with is different people and different departments all doing it differently. And now when they try to talk to each other or communicate across the organization, or sometimes even inside the same department, they're not using the same language. They're not using the same vocabulary. They don't understand what it means to go to a document library inside of Teams to hit the Files tab, to hit, like, that means nothing to people if you haven't explained to them what that is. And so I just like to reinforce that moving into these cloud-based solutions is more than just a server migration. This is unlike any other file server migration you've ever done in the past. It truly is a revolutionary computing change. You're literally changing how people have used computers, in some cases for decades. If you think about it, servers and my accessing the shared drive and all of that's been the same literally for decades. And you've got people that have been doing it that way for decades. Now you're talking about fundamentally changing that in a revolutionary way. And so you've got to train them. You've got to teach them how to do it. Yes, some users will adopt faster than others. Some will adapt faster than others. But you need to spend the time educating all of your users, regardless of how excited they are about this change. And I will just tell you, I've done a whole lot of this training. I've done it virtually. I've done it in person. I've recorded videos and asked people to watch them. Nothing holds a candle to in-person classroom style training. Get people in the room, sitting at tables with their laptops in front of them, interactively walking through the scenarios and the training with a live instructor. Absolutely the best, most effective training style, bar none. If you can't do that, doing it via a Zoom or Teams session or doing it some other way, that can work. Recording the videos, if people will watch them, it can help. But I'm just telling you, invest your time, energy, money, whatever it takes to do the in-person training. Feel free to talk to Enable clients and others around the country. We'd be more than happy to give you references of people you can talk to that have done it, and they can tell you how effective it was. If nothing else, it brings your whole staff together, or groups of your staff at a time together, to engage together. Churches, we love to fellowship, right? And guess what? Church people are pretty used to sitting down and listening to somebody talk to them. It's almost like they do it once or twice a week. So this is natural to them. They're not going to want to go to IT training. I get it. But you have to do everything you can to A, get them there, make it required. Again, leadership pushing into that. Don't make it optional. Make it required. And then you've got to do an amazing job at really making it fun and exciting and helpful. If you will do that, your staff will thank you and they will appreciate it, and you will see great adoption of these solutions. So do it yourself, hire us to do it. However you make it happen, make it happen. Train, train, train. Do not skip this. You can skip almost anything else that we've talked about. Do not skip the training.
I couldn't agree more. I don't mean to interrupt you. I just have a thought as you're talking. When people go to a training, whether you have to do it on the weekend because people are, serving the church all week and you can't pull people away because they're needing to serve people, then people have skin in the game, right? They've invested their time and their weekend or their evenings in a class. So it's the same way when you buy something that's maybe, now that you have, for lack of a better term, skin in the game. It's like, okay, well, if I'm here, I'm going to at least put the effort forth to learn it and then use it. So instead of just handing it to them as easily as you can, sometimes them putting in the effort will in turn create better adoption in the long run.
100%. 100% agree with that statement. And this dovetails into so many other topics that I am very passionate about, if you can't tell. But invest in this training. Absolutely do it. Don't skimp. Don't skip this part. You have to do it. You will reap the rewards, I promise you. Because by the way we recommend doing the training is the users walk out of training not only having been trained, but with some requirements of what they're going to do next to get themselves into the platform, whatever platform that is. And I'm being purposefully vague about what tools are because it doesn't matter. I'm pointing out that you're fundamentally changing things of how they use technology. You got to teach them how. You got to teach them what the expectations are. So, all right. I feel like we drove that point home. Okay, so some common questions, some common concerns that we hear from folks. Well, okay, but And some of these are a little more techy, right? So these may be from your technical folks. I don't know who else is on the webinar with us, but again, I'll try to keep it high level. But a common one is, well, what about printing? All of our printing goes through our servers. If we don't have servers, how are we going to print? Well, there's solutions for that. You can print directly to the IP address of the printers, and there are ways to script that so it's easily deployable across both Windows and Mac OS. Or there's great solutions. Printix is one. There are others as well. That's a cloud native printing management system. So you can install a basic agent and publish printers essentially through a cloud infrastructure like Printix. So you can absolutely solve the printing problem. By the way, a lot of this is in relationship to, hey, I want to go truly serverless. Well, I got to get rid of all the other things, right? And so printing, it tends to be a common one. I don't have it on this list, but I'll go ahead and add this. Well, what about my DNS? And what about my DHCP? And what about my Active Directory user accounts? Well, all of those things are solvable. Your DNS and your DHCP, those are not Windows services. We tend to see them running on Windows environments, especially if you are a Windows environment, but those are network services. So imagine what else is in your network, hint, hint, that can manage that for you. User authentication. Well, these cloud platforms, if we're talking about Google or we're talking about Microsoft specifically, those have their own identity solutions, identity platforms built right in. And nowadays, both of those platforms have solutions to allow you to authenticate at a workstation level using that cloud identity. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, just know these are solvable problems, and we'd be more than happy to explore that more deeply with you. Security. How do I manage policies and settings and management of computers? So again, this tends to be from those Active Directory folks asking about group policy. How do we put policies in place? Well, you can do that with cloud solutions as well. Microsoft has the Intune, or now they refer to it as endpoint management system. So there's ways to do that. And again, even Google has some options in this space. So there's some choices for you. Data loss prevention. Ooh, big fancy term. So the first thing you have to know is, well, what data are you protecting? I would ask you, how have you been protecting it in the past? So you've got spreadsheets on your file server that have people's private information in them. How have you stopped your people from emailing those as attachments to people in the past? Most of you probably have never even thought about that. You've never done anything about it. So my question is not should you, but simply don't overreact and go, well, just because it's in the cloud, now all of a sudden it's a bigger issue. This is not a new problem. Hopefully you've been educating and teaching and training and telling your staff about your policies around how they protect data. And if you haven't, start there. Start with policies and procedures and education. Don't start with technical controls, okay? That's a whole nother topic for another day, but this is not a new problem, and it's not really a technology problem. Can you use technical controls like data loss prevention and automatic data classification and information protection policies? Yeah, lots of technical jargon. Can you implement technical solutions to help empower those policies and procedures? Absolutely. But you got to start with having policies and procedures first. Don't let the tail wag the dog. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking these are technology problems. They're not. Technology should support your policies and procedures around what you're supposed to do with that protected data. A question that we get asked is, okay, but if I put all my stuff in Google or I put all my stuff in Microsoft, that makes it a really big target. Yes, but they also have the best trained engineers in the world helping to protect it. I'll just be honest. I think I'm a pretty smart technology guy, and we've got a lot of great, really, really smart technology guys and gals here at Enable. I don't hold a candle, and nobody in my company does, to the people that Microsoft and Google are employing to secure their environments. Are they infallible? No. Am I? No. Are you? So they're investing in it, and I trust them to invest in it. And they've got a whole lot riding on this, because trust me, they're protecting more than just my church and your church and Enable data. They're protecting the data of Fortune 50 and up companies literally all over the world. They got a whole lot riding on their ability to do those protections. And so far, I would say that they've done a really great job and been very honest about how well that's worked and how well it hasn't, and what they've done to fix it when it hasn't. So, all right. That's it. That's all my prepared content.
Great.
So, any questions?
I have a thought. Will you give an example of maybe a situation where someone could have both like cloud-based systems and software that they use and server? So kind of go down a list in your mind, like of an example you've seen where people utilize both.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have several churches right now in this situation where they are using, I'll use the Microsoft stack. So Microsoft 365 with Microsoft Teams and OneDrive and all of their email and all of that data, all their files, all of that happens in the cloud. It happens in the Microsoft 365 cloud system. But on premises, goodness, how can I keep getting that wrong?
Yeah,
It's not a premise. It's on site. Let's just go with that. On site, they have servers. They may still have those for the basic login functionality so they can reset user passwords and things, and that's happening because they've got lots and lots of computers. But especially their HVAC controller system has to run on a server. Well, so they're going to have a server. And when you have to have one, then it's easy to have more. The hardest thing is getting down to how do I get to the place of having none? Because the minute you tell me that there's one thing that requires a server, I'm just going to tell you right then why are we pushing so hard to get rid of everything else? We can reduce it, but let's not feel like we have to go all serverless. If there's that one thing that requires it, okay, cool. Then we have that one. Maybe it's media. Maybe it's media storage. So we have several clients that just have a storage device, a NAS, sometimes Synology or others, just for storing all that heavy media because it's a lot of it. And they need it local because they need it fast. And they want it local because it's a lot of it. So they don't want to pay the cloud costs associated with that storage. So maybe that's the one server that they have. So hopefully that helps.
That does. That's helpful for me as well. Someone also had a question kind of about cybersecurity, and you touched on security as it relates to policy and setting up accurate training and people using those policies. Anything else you want to touch on as it relates to cybersecurity in the cloud?
Oh, well, that could be probably a topic of its own. What I would say is you are absolutely right to question it. You're absolutely right to be thinking about it. But I think my biggest piece of advice is what I already alluded to a minute ago. Start with your policies and procedures first. And yeah, I know that's like the other four-letter word in a church, right? Nobody wants to talk about policies or process or procedure in a church. That's just like anti-culture to most church environments. I get it. But by the same token, don't ask your IT department to go protect you or stop things from leaking if you're not willing as an organization to define what that means and to tell people that they shouldn't leak it. So I would say probably the simplest example of that would be if you're allowing your staff to store people's social security numbers in a spreadsheet, but you're never telling them that they shouldn't share that, they should never send that via email, or maybe they shouldn't do it at all. And then you're going to tell the IT department or your cloud provider, hey, don't let us store social security numbers on OneDrive, or don't let us share a file from OneDrive if it has social security numbers in it. Well, your technology department should not be making those rules. Your technology department should not be enforcing rules that have not been communicated through other mechanisms and other means to your staff. Because what happens, your technology department or your cloud provider ends up being the bad guy. And now when your ministry person is like, hey, but I have to be able to do that. Well, what's your technology person or your cloud provider supposed to do with that? They didn't make the rule, or did they? But should they have? No. There needs to be leadership and there needs to be policies, like literal written policies that say, this is not acceptable, this is not okay. And then all the technology does is it just enforces the rule that's already been defined in the policy.
Mhm.
That is so huge. And if you look at any security compliance frameworks, and you look at things like PCI, and you look at HIPAA, and you look at so many others that exist these days, go actually look at those. They are not actually technology control platforms. They are procedure and process and policy platforms, where technology is just designed to enforce the policies. But it's a chicken and egg. The policy has to come first before the technology can enforce it.
So to follow up on that, what about ransomware?
So ransomware is a threat for sure. Ransomware is something that you need to be cognizant of, and you need to have protections against, and you need to know what you would do if you had a ransomware infection take place. I will offer, again, specific to Microsoft 365, if you're storing your files in OneDrive, in Teams, in SharePoint, there's actually some really great recovery functionality that exists natively in those tools. We have had clients have a OneDrive become completely encrypted because their local system was ransomed. So their system was was infected with ransomware. All of the files that were synchronized to OneDrive got encrypted. Once we took that machine offline, we were able to log into Microsoft's 365 system and just roll their OneDrive back to a point in time before the ransomware event, and all their files were magically there and available again. So those are some capabilities that cloud solutions can provide to help with those recovery efforts. But just because you've got your stuff in the cloud doesn't mean you're naturally protected or immune to ransomware events. I will go ahead and throw this out there because somebody asked about, well, what about security in the cloud? What the number one thing that you can absolutely do to highly improve your organization's security for the things that are in the cloud, implement multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication, we've done blog posts and other things about this. We're happy to share it. But basically it means you don't just need a username and a password to get access to an account. You need a third thing. Normally that's a code that's either on a phone or gets texted to a phone, or maybe there's an app and you approve the login on demand. There's different ways that they work. Different vendors do it differently. But the number one thing you can do to protect your users and your data, implement multi-factor authentication. I would argue it's important whether you're using the cloud or not. But yes, if you're putting your things in the cloud, you are more at risk. You are an easier target for that kind of attack. And we have so many other security things that we could talk about. I would refer you back to some of our previous content and our blogs and things that talk about that.
Just last month, we did a simplifying cybersecurity webinar. So
that's right.
That's right.
If you're not tired of hearing me talk just yet, you can go listen to me talk some more about security.
But you do simplify the things that you should be doing in the cybersecurity realm. You mentioned 3 top things. So that is a good one to really simplify where to look at, because there are so many things out there and it can be overwhelming, just like this conversation is about cloud. So about where to start and all of that. Well, unless Travis has anything else he wants to do to wrap us up, we don't seem to be getting any other questions. That was great. I have a better understanding about the cloud after today. So thank you for teaching me something new today, Travis.
My pleasure.
If we don't have anything else, we will have another webinar hopefully in the next month or two. And we will definitely communicate with you guys via emails, or check out our website. There's our website right there. And if you have a topic that you would like for us to cover, please tell us. If your church is experiencing something, a topic that we've not gone over before, please let us know. You can access our webinars. You can go to our website, and then in the resources drop down, there's a whole webinars page. So it's enableministry.com/webinars is the direct link. Caroline, if you don't mind putting that in the chat for anyone that wants to access our webinars, but also our blog. That is where all of our content that we personally create. We work with our engineers. Travis writes blogs. Some of our top engineers, they're so technical that we kind of have to make sure that it's able to be read because they're so smart. So we do have great resources on our blog, but also very applicable so that your church, you could send it to maybe an end user if they need some Microsoft training or some help with their teams. So Caroline has put those in the chat, and feel free to check those out. So without dragging this on, we will go on and wrap up for today. And Travis, thank you again for your expertise on this topic, and we appreciate everyone that came on today. Bye, guys.